Hello, everyone. This is Tom Siga with the Duluth Pack Podcast, Leader of the Pack. And today we have a special guest, John Kratz. John is a retired professor from the University of Minnesota Duluth, and he was in the School of Business and Economics, and he was instrumental in bringing in the sales program. And we're going to get into some depth on not only that program, the success of that program, but we're going to go back and talk about John. We're going to talk about his career, how he went from the business realm and private business into the academia world, and then we're going to talk about storytelling in sales. And as so many people know, I love sales. Up from the tip of my toes to the top of my head, I'm a salesman. And I have one statement, John, that I've always said before we welcome you here is nothing is made before something is sold. John Kratz, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tom. It's great being here. Duluth Pack is one of my favorite brands, and it's an honor to be here with one of the most iconic made-in-America products in the world. So,
well, thanks. And we believe that as well, and we're very proud of it. And it really, we just carry on the legacy of 140 years, the caretakers for a few years while we're here, and then the next people will carry it on. But let's get into John. Let's talk and go bring us way back. And you graduated college in business at UMD, University of Minnesota Duluth, and bring us forward from there.
well, if I could, would you mind if I start in high school?
Go back to high school.
Okay, so we're talking the mid-'70s, right? I graduated from high school in northeast Minneapolis, a small little high school called St. Anthony Village. And the story of that is that I really wasn't a very good student in high school. As a matter of fact, my parents, I was a juvenile delinquent, meaning I didn't commit felonies or do anything real seriously wrong.
We're in a small room here, John, and I'm up against the corner here. You're getting me a little nervous.
But I did occasionally come home in the back of police cars. And my father, he thought I needed to go into the military to straighten myself out. And so the good news is when I applied at the University of Minnesota Duluth in 1976, if you recall, back in those days, they would probably let anybody in.
Hey, they let me in a few years later.
And so I went off to college. I went to UMD to, in essence, my motivation was to prove my father wrong, that I could hack college. And it wasn't the best economic times, and my father's vision for me was to be an accountant. And it only took me a couple semesters of accounting to realize that I wasn't going to be an accountant.
Well, come on. You went the opposite direction. You have accountants. I love accountants. Actually, I met with mine today. But you have accountants, and you got salespeople.
Yeah.
Can you get more polar opposite than that?
Well, I ran into a course called Intermediate Accounting, and I guess that's kind of the washout class. So then I decided my strategy was to take the path of least resistance to get the college degree, and I became a communications major, even though I had completed most of the lower division electives in business. Mm-hmm. So I technically had the equivalent of a business minor, although I didn't have them in the right buckets, so they didn't give me a minor. But so I went in the communications department and fell in love with some great professors that were up there, Jackson Huntley, John Ness, and I fell in love with the whole rhetorical theory of argumentation, persuasion, and that was just kind of a nice segue into maybe starting my sales career. And
23 years worth of it.
So, yep, I graduated in November 1980, and the way I found my first job, this is in early 81, right? So Carter's coming out of office, Reagan's coming in, and there's this little...
economy was great at that time.
Well, actually, where I was working as a waiter, they were actually doing quite well. You're familiar with Grandma's Saloon and Deli.
I've never been there.
Andy Borg, Mickey Palucci, Young Entrepreneurs, right? This was
Absolutely.
Early in Grandma's history. There was no development on Canal Park, right? Just dilapidated warehouses, and Grandma's was really the only game in town, right next to the aerial lift bridge. And there were lines out the door. I don't know if you recall that far, but I waited on a woman who was the head of human resources, and she apparently must have liked the job I was doing waiting, and she asked me if I'd be interested in selling butter. And so in 1981, I started my career as a butter salesman, and I can assure you that was not my mother's vision for me.
You know what? But let's see where that vision of yours went by selling butter.
Well, as I looked at it, it was unemployment was 10%. Inflation was over 10%. Do you know what a 30-year fixed mortgage was back in 1981, early 1981?
Yeah, they were pushing like 14 to 16%.
They got as high as 17% mortgage rates. And so my rationale was
People can't believe that. In today's date,
yeah.
it's 2021, and we're talking about mortgage rates that are under 3%, for 15 years, right around 3% for 30-year fixed mortgages. And you and I are talking about, because we're the same vintage here, buying houses and going, did I ever do good? I got 12.5%.
Well, my rationale was that even in a recession, people still have to eat. And so I figured selling butter would be a secure job. But then I found out that at that time, I don't know if you recall, but people were switching to margarine. And butter sales were actually declining. I didn't find that out until I got into it.
I never slapped myself in the forehead and said, butter sales were declining at one point in my life.
Yeah, and we actually, Land O'Lakes, when I was there, that was one of the new products we brought to market, was we got in the margarine business, and we got our lunch eaten by Kraft. But anyway, so
that had to be a sales challenge just there, because you guys were the kings of butter, right? Land O'Lakes.
Yeah, we had 60% national share,
and now you have to switch direction here.
And I'll never forget going through a margarine plant and finding out that margarine's only 2 molecules away from plastic. So I'm a big believer in butter. Right? Butter, everything's better with butter.
Well, you know what? And bacon,
and
the other food group, right?
Yeah.
Plastic. We don't need to get into. We don't need to get. This isn't a chemistry lesson here. What we want to really learn about is sales and storytelling and all that. So keep bringing us forward here.
Well, so I had some good fortune in the butter business. I was also selling cheese. And I got a promotion to go down to Houston, Texas, and in my early 20s, I was running one of the largest consumer markets for Land O'Lakes down in Houston, Texas, and ended up being recruited back to the Twin Cities area by Pillsbury for kind of an inside product management role. So I kind of switched gears, did a little marketing, kind of a liaison between product brand marketing and sales at Pillsbury. And then I got my big break, where I was recruited by a company that, if you can believe this, drum roll please, they sold ads on shopping carts. And I don't know if you remember back in the mid-'80s, but new media stocks were the darling of Wall Street. And the name of the company was called Act Media, and we were one of the highest flying stocks on Wall Street. And our network of shopping cart stores that we had under contract to advertise on shopping carts, we were in over 14,000 high-volume supermarkets that we estimated 60% of U.S. households shopped in an average of 2.2 times a week. So this was the equivalent of buying television network advertising in terms of size of buy.
So on the shopping carts, where do you even advertise?
Well,
the little flip-up plastic deal?
Nope. This was a front placard on the front of the cart that had an outside showing, as well as an inside showing to the shopper. So as the carts circulated around the stores, there would be an outside billboard effect because you had one ad on the outside.
Sure.
And then the shopper shopping, if their cart was empty, would be exposed to another ad on the interior.
It's like NASCAR.
Yeah, it was huge. The average gross insertion rate for a 4-week flight was over $300,000. Now that's in 1987 dollars.
Holy
So you
cow.
might think about what was, and so I ended up landing a few little accounts like General Mills,
Small little company.
breakfast cereal,
Yeah, wee little company.
and Kimberly Clark. They were in the diaper wars with Pampers, right? Huggies versus Pampers.
Oh, KC is
And
huge.
they literally bought my total ad inventory for the year up front. So it was almost negotiated like upfront television. And
You're that sales
I made
guy
more
that
money than I ever dreamed before I was ever 30 years old. Unfortunately, I didn't do a very good job of keeping a lot of it. But anyways, so that was kind of my launch into the career, and really, I made the most money I ever made in my life when I was 29 years old.
holy catfish.
Yeah.
So, you obviously understood markets.
Mm-hmm.
You understood what customers' needs are by working hard and figuring out what are those needs and how can I fill the needs, because as a salesperson, what are you? You're a problem solver.
Mm-hmm.
And then you started learning this whole thing about I just don't have a product to sell, but I have a story to tell.
Right.
So let us in on that, on how you started using that before you even really put a method to the madness.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been in sales my whole career, and in preparing for today, I started thinking about it because you and I have had a long relationship. We got to know each other several years ago, and you know, you've been really great to the company, and we've done some things back and forth with the university. But I've always been a pretty good storyteller, I believe myself.
Sure.
But I never put a definitive method to the madness on how this was happening and why this was happening.
Mm-hmm.
What you've done is put a method to this madness of what a lot of us out there in sales were maybe lucky that we figured some of it out but didn't know why. And too
Yep.
bad we didn't figure out the whys a lot earlier.
Yeah, and like most effective storytellers, I did it intuitively. I didn't really have. I was kind of unconsciously competent, I think they say. In other words, I did it intuitively, but I didn't really have a framework, and I wasn't aware of it. And I didn't really become aware of it until much later, even in my academic career. It wasn't until 2014 that a light bulb went off and I was exposed to, oh, this is why I was effective, right? Which means now I could teach the framework and help organizations teach it internally and help it scale within organizations. So there's a pretty big jump, right, from the mid 80s to when I really discovered storytelling.
But obviously you had a successful career in between those. So
Yeah.
so 23 years in sales.
But I got to tell you, a lot of the success that I had was because I worked for some incredible people that were incredibly talented and smarter than me, that really taught me how to sell into a large enterprise and sell into senior level decision makers.
Indulge us a little bit about that.
Okay.
What these people taught you to get that success. Well, you were still in that first 23 years of that career.
Well, the first thing is you have to remember the sales tech stack back in the mid 80s was a yellow 8.5 by 11 notepad and a pen.
Oh yeah.
There was no CRM, right?
No.
There was no internet, hadn't been invented. And so a lot of it was really coming in and asking good questions, being sincerely curious about the client's business, trying to find out what they were trying to accomplish, what their priorities were. So not just identifying their needs, but what compelling needs, right, that they actually might budget and spend money on.
Yep.
And how I could align my product and show them a business case, whether through a story as how I might benefit their customer or improve their operation, but then be able to show them visually using data in a story format to paint a picture for them to come to a buying decision. So
that was one thing I was
Right.
going to go to is
Mhm.
is getting the decision making people
Mhm.
that you're solving their problems,
Right.
because that's really what you were trying to do from what I'm hearing you saying. And each one was going to be different. And so you had to really listen and then put together that story.
Put together that story, and importantly, and remember there was no emails, so a lot of it was documenting back that story in writing, right? That came to them back by snail mail,
Yep.
and it was really built around the philosophy that people. I was taught that people love to buy, but they hate to feel sold.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So where salespeople run into the problem is when they apply pressure through their behavior, where if the buyer feels pressured, that you're creating all kinds of walls, right, in terms of communicating. And so I always took the mindset that I wasn't really selling as much as if people love to buy, well then facilitate their buying, right?
Help do their job for them.
Help do their job. So one of my first goals to come in wasn't to talk about how great my product was or capabilities of my product. It was really to understand how they wanted to buy. And then rather than drive my sales process at them, I aligned how I sold with how they bought or how their buying process. And remember, the people in my career, typically I was dealing with anywhere from 4 to 6 different people involved in the decision because of the amount of money.
So you're doing all of this, but for listeners out there, how did you formulate that? Because you're saying that I was dealing with the people, 4 to 6 people, finding out what their needs were, and then meeting those needs. But there's some homework that goes into figuring out from the Q&A that you've done with the customer to what is that individual. And if you're dealing with 6 people at one entity, each one of them has different needs.
Yep.
I mean, one of the buyer's needs might be to keep their boss off their backside.
Yep.
That might be their biggest need, or to have you make them look good, or for you to make sure you meet their budget, or for you to bring in something new and beat everyone else to the punch. Each one of those things is a different need, maybe for a different person. How did you go about figuring that out for that buyer?
Well, that's a big challenge, as you know, right? Because oftentimes those individual factors, like, hey, I want to look good in front of my boss, or hey, I want to get promotion, right? I don't want to look bad, right? Risk. Those oftentimes are concerns that buyers won't articulate. They're thinking it, right? But they're not overtly sharing it with you.
Right.
So part of that is gaining that trust so that they believe that you have their best interests at heart, so that you get them to open up where you can read them. Some people call it emotional intelligence, but it's the idea to realize that those individual factors are still at play, rarely articulated, but it's not just about having a good business case.
So you just hit on something there, and you said the word trust.
Yeah.
And I've always, in my whole career in sales, that's been a big thing, is that people aren't going to buy from people that they don't trust. And I've always had a saying for people, and you let me know if you think this is accurate. I've always said, people buy from people they like. And when you like somebody, you generally trust them.
Yep.
And it seems like that's falling in line with what you're saying is you've done a lot of question and answer. You found out what the needs are of each individual person. You built that trust from that person. And once you've built that trust, then you can start moving to literally selling to them, where you're trying to get them to get you the purchase order, to close the deal with that person.
Creating a favorable interest in establishing trust and belief has to be done up front before you get into your discovery questions.
And tell us what that is. So what we're trying to do is educate
Sure.
everyone out there. Give me some examples of discovery questions.
Well, if you go to sales training, and listen, there's $20 billion spent annually on sales training, right? And
Right.
if you go out to LinkedIn today, everybody and their dog Rex is a sales expert
Correct.
offering advice. But typically, one of the things that you'll hear is that you want to ask good questions, right, about the client's needs, right? What are their problems, so that you can listen and determine. But the problem I've seen happen in the marketplace, particularly with younger people coming out of these sales training programs, is they go into those discovery questions way too early, and the buyer backs off and says, "Whoa, you don't know me well enough to start asking me these questions about my business,"
Sure.
right? Because they haven't taken the time to make that human connection, to establish that trusted belief and build trust. And so, a sales guru that I work with, a guy named Mike Bosworth, who wrote a book called Solution Selling, he likes to call that premature elaboration or discovery resistance. It's when we get into those discoveries. If you and I go to a doctor, they already have our trust, hopefully, right? And they'll come in and ask good diagnostic questions, a doctor, right? Or an
Right.
attorney. But as a salesperson, we don't have that. We don't have that credibility and trust with a buyer.
Not when you're meeting with them
Not
first time. Not
so.
when probably the first multiple times.
So that's really where story can come into play early in that conversation, before you're into the discovery questions, to knock down those barriers that exist between buyers and sellers. Because let's face it, if you're a buyer and a salesman, shows up, we know that based on they making sense, their experience with prior salespersons has probably been negative, and so that's the stigma that as salespeople we have to overcome, right?
Absolutely. No question. They think
Yeah.
that a lot of people and a lot of buyers, and rightfully so, because so many salespeople out there are just trying to shove a product or a service down somebody's throat. And if we're trying to differentiate ourselves and be above that fray and saying, no, I want to build a relationship with you, I want to earn your trust before I even try to sell you anything, because I don't want to sell you just once.
Right.
I want to sell you for the rest of my career. And if I just come in hard and I try to sell to you, I may make that sale that first time. But where do I go from there? And I think that's where you're talking about with the story here, formulating that story, building that rapport, learning. And as my father used to tell me when I first got into sales, he said, John, he would tell me, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And most of us salespeople love to talk, but we need to listen twice as much as we talk.
I'm glad you brought up listening, because I believe that listening is the path to real influence. We talk a lot, and we're going to talk more about storytelling, but one of our goals as salespeople, when we lead with a story, it's really to set up the buyer reciprocating with their story, and we want to tend the buyer's story, but we have to go first with our story, right?
So I was just going to ask you that.
Story listening, you've hit it. Story listening is the key to influence. It's not talking, it's listening.
So give us an example for our listeners out
Sure.
there about story listening. Well, let's stop right there. Just story listening. Let's talk about that, and then I'll follow it up with something else.
Sure. Well, one way, back in my career, if I was calling on, say, a media director for a large ad agency, right? Maybe in Chicago or New York, and I knew that they were managing the network television dollar and budget for my account, and I knew that I wanted to get some of that money allocated into my shopping cart network, right?
Correct.
When I would call on that media director in Chicago, I might lead with a story where I might say, Tom, I realized, coming down here today, you and I have never met or talked before. Quite frankly, I don't know if there's alignment between what I do and what you're looking to achieve, and I'm hoping we can have a short conversation today to mutually determine that. But can I tell you a quick story about another media director I've worked with in consumer packaged goods who was spending 95% of his money on network television, and by reallocating his budget just 5%, I was able to increase the overall net effective reach and efficiency of the ad spend. Would that be of interest to you?
So what you're doing is you're starting into some questioning, and
I'm asking permission to
Correct.
share a story of one of his peers, a media director, large agency, managing television dollars for a consumer packaged goods company. And Tom, for this purposes of this role play, right? If you're a media director running television for a large consumer packaged goods company, would you be curious to hear that story?
if a guy's gonna, get the return on investment that he's looking for, getting the reach that he's looking for what he's trying to accomplish, all you're doing is listening. That's what you've given up, is some time. So the answer is yes to that. And so people out there listening to this, whether you're fresh, new into sales, which is a great career, by the way, I tell you what.
Yes, it is.
I love selling. Actually, Ryan's at a trade show right now, and I'm a little bit envious because he's out there selling. But I'm with you. Come on, who gets it better today, right? But when you're selling like that, there's so many dynamics that go into it that where you're trying to get to is a path, but you had a plan in place. And what you're doing is you're not telling him the story. You're asking, what I heard is you asked for permission to tell a story. So
And
people need to listen to that, whether you're new
Yep.
or old in sales like me. We kind of forget about those things. We don't think about them. Some people just do them because they've been doing it a long time, but we don't really think of that as asking the customer's permission. At the end of the day, they're the customer.
Right. And when you lead with a peer story, meaning if I was, calling on another apparel manufacturer, and I said, Tom, can I tell you about another apparel manufacturer CEO that I recently had a conversation with? He also makes all his product in America. Can I tell you a story about that? I think as a CEO president of an apparel company, you would be curious about your peer, wouldn't you?
Yeah, of course we are. Because that's
so it's pure curiosity that you're kind of leaning into, right? Because remember, back in the 80s, buyers didn't have the internet to do research. So one of the reasons they might meet with me is because they were curious to know what their peers were doing.
Absolutely.
And so it's pure curiosity that we're hopefully, if the story's well told and compelling, right? Now, you got to keep it short. You have max 90 seconds. Right? Never tell a story without a point. Never make a point without a story. You better have a solid business point with metrics in the story. So I might say the media director, they were buying at this CPM, and I was able to increase. We were working with him. Tom was able to increase his budget by 30%. But that's enough about me, Tom. What's going on here?
You're getting back to them to learn more and get them talking.
We're going to tend. Now remember, my story's only 90 seconds. But when I've gone back and now I'm passing the torch and saying, Tom, enough about me, what's going on here? That's when I found these media directors. They'd talk for 30 minutes. Their story.
And as long as you, as salespeople, are willing to listen to their story,
Yes, listen.
take notes, but
Yes.
do more than listen. Take notes. I had to. My memory wasn't good enough. Once my customers,
I had my 8.5 by 11 notepad.
the yellow notepad, and you've
Taking
actually
notes.
folded those pages
Yep.
so many times they tear
Yep.
out anyway.
Yeah.
And you got to take bullet points. That's one thing that I would say is once they're telling their story, you've got to take notes, because there's going to be follow-up down the line.
Yeah.
Because as a salesperson, I can tell you in my career, and I had a pretty darn good career in sales, there were very few times that I ever walked in and the customer goes, "Where have you been my whole life? Oh my gosh, here's my
Never happens.
here's my my PO book, and you know what? It's yours. Here, I'm going to write POs until the day is done." That doesn't happen. This is part of the process. Mm-hmm. And what you've done is what you just told me is you've come in, you've asked them for a little bit of time, mm-hmm. you've asked their permission to tell them a story about
Up here.
and then
Hopefully a relevant peer,
well, yeah,
right?
I mean, you got to do
Yeah,
your
it's got to
homework,
be relevant.
right?
Got to do your homework.
And then and I didn't take notes here, but
Yeah.
I was listening pretty intently because even an old dog can learn new tricks here, John.
Very, very
And then what you did was you quieted up once it was his turn to take the table, your customer, and let them talk.
true. Yep.
Take notes and make sure that you're getting what they're saying. What do you do next?
Well, as you mentioned, you listen, you take notes. When you tend the story, I like to use the metaphor of tending a garden, right? So in tending a story, you're looking for those emotional breadcrumbs that the buyer might leave, and maybe it's not anything they overtly say. It could be actually a nonverbal cue that you pick up on, and if the buyer's grimacing and you can tell they're feeling discomfort or pain, you might as you're tending their story, you might say, Tom, how did that feel? How did that impact you? The fact that the CEO's on your neck to increase the efficiency of your admin. How do you feel about that? And in other words, get them to emote, right? Some feelings to get. It's almost like therapy a little bit. If that
Well,
makes sense.
you are a problem solver.
Right, you're a problem solver, and so it's getting back to that point that you brought up early, which I really liked, which is we have all these motivators that buyers have that they don't share with us that are about their own interest and them looking good in their organization and them wanting to get promotion and right, they want to be the hero. Make your customer the hero, and you want to make your customer the hero of their story. And so what I might do as I tend the story and try to follow those emotional breadcrumbs, I might say, Tom, I really appreciate you sharing that with me. Do you mind if I just recap that right now, just to make sure I understand? And I may actually restate their story because I have a story building framework that I use when I listen. Okay,
I always did that. I always called it reiterating my
Correct.
notes,
Restating,
back to the customer.
active listening. We
Yeah.
called it in communication, right?
Oh, well, I must
Active
have
listening.
skipped that class. But I always try to reiterate, especially the highlights of what. So what you're telling me is that last year you tried something new and it was a total bust, or I tried something new and it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And so that tells me that, boy, I got my work cut out for me because I'm trying to outdo sliced bread. I mean, come on, does it get any better than that? And so you learn a lot, but when you're reiterating it, you're hitting all their bullet points and they're nodding yes. Yep. Here's what I took it as, is that I was taking the time to listen and write and showing them that what they had to say was important, because I'm more than showing it. It is important. It's everything to our careers in sales is what matters to the customer.
Yep.
The other thing that I would add to what you're saying is to people in this whole process, and you're still just discovering here, right? In the whole discovery phase. And I've been through a lot of sales and been doing it a long time, is you got to be truthful. You've got to be honest and willing to just throw it out there, and don't ever tell your customer what you think they want to hear, or come back at that point where you are right now when you're still formulating a story. Don't ever come back and just switch gears now and say, okay, I heard some things that are needs of theirs. Let's go into close this sale and let's start talking product. I think that would be a kiss of death about now.
Yes. Product training, in my mind, is one of the big inhibitors to sales productivity. When I have some of my former students, right, that are going into sales careers, and I follow them, and I ask about their onboarding training, what kind of training, and the marketing people come in for a day, right, and they get all the features dumped on them about the product. And so what do you think these young kids do? They go out and they start talking features.
Everything is a feature.
Everything's
This pen
a
is
feature.
loaded with features. This water bottle's loaded with features. This mixing table over here is loaded with features.
I love marketing people, but they can, if product training's not done right, it can be a big inhibitor for young salespeople because they become product centric, not customer centric.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because you know what? I don't think anyone buys a feature of a product. They buy benefits.
Yep.
And that's what you're trying to discover here.
Yeah.
Is what can I do that benefits my customer? You're not even into the product yet.
Can I share with you why I like to buy Duluth pack handcrafted items? Like I figured out.
Sure.
It's not that they're made in America, which I love, right? I love products that are made in America. It's not that you were established in 1882. I love that, right? An incredible story. I like myself best when I walk in that boardroom carrying my pack. It's how I feel around the product, right? That pride of ownership.
But what about when you bought your first?
The first I had was a gift.
So then you kind of fell in love with that product.
I was introduced to the brand as a gift, and I started getting compliments. So there's social proof, right? And I'm starting to feel good about myself. And, if you think about it, consumers rarely will say things like, why did the divorce guy go out and buy the new red Corvette convertible? He'd tell you because it goes from 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds. I negotiated a great deal, but the reason that divorce guy really bought that white convertible is because he likes himself best when he's driving around in it. So,
well, I don't have a convertible, and I've
No,
never
no.
been divorced, so
No,
I'll
I
have
don't
to listen.
recommend it.
I'll have to listen and take that one in.
But it's the psychology, the art of the sale, right? That there's these motives and things that aren't stated that drive buying that as salespeople we have to be aware of and facilitate.
I got to tell you a funny story here.
Yeah, I love stories.
We're storytelling. So one of my customers who from a past life in a different industry has become a very close friend of mine. In fact, we were texting earlier today, and lives in a different part of the country. And I had no clue I did this.
This is a customer.
This is a customer of mine.
That's now a friend.
He's now a very close personal friend. And the first time, and I didn't know this for years and years, the first time that I had ever introduced myself to him, I worked in the pulp and paper industry, his machine was crashing. That is huge money out the door.
Was he feeling pain?
Oh, Lord, he was feeling pain. And I come in at probably the worst possible time, and he says to me, and I observed at a young age, that this is a really horrible time to be here. I do remember that, but I don't remember what I said to him when he asked me, he goes, what do you want to sell me? And this guy was tough.
Ouch.
My answer was nothing. Your machine is hanging out. That's what it was called in the industry. And can I go out there and help you guys try to get it re-going again, get it running again? And
wow,
I didn't know I even said any of this,
Yeah.
but he was in a world of hurt. Paper machines love to run. They don't like to be down. And when he asked me what I was trying to sell him, I said nothing. And I guess I observed that it was the right time. It was one of the best decisions of my life. He became very loyal very quickly. This is a good lesson for people because what John's talking about here is trying to get a methodology to what you're doing. And I did something and now somebody who I built so much trust has become a dear friend of mine. And I built trust very, very quickly without even having a methodology, without even knowing I did it, I built trust because I didn't try to sell this guy anything. I tried to help solve a problem.
You were sincerely curious about helping him solve a problem.
This was probably about 3 p.m, and I said goodnight to him about 3 a.m. We were on that paper machine working, and he was there longer than I was, but we had it back on the reel, which is pretty powerful. And I was always welcome back in there. He wasn't going to make it and just buy anything from me the rest of my career. He was actually one of my toughest customers because we had become pretty close friends. So he was going to be tough on me. But that goes back to I did that in that day, and I've always remembered that when he tells me his name is Rick House, and he really we built that trust, and I had no methodology to it. And what you're doing is saying we can put methodology to these successes that people had in the past that did it through learning, going through a lot of pain as salespeople, making a lot of mistakes as salespeople. And hey, you know what? Generally, the successful ones don't even know they're doing a methodology, but they've built in their own methodology. What you've done is said, we need to think about this and actually put that methodology in place so that you think about this more and more and more instead of maybe people like me at the time. I didn't think about it. I knew where my pain points were and I knew where my weaknesses were and stay away from those and concentrate on your customer and always listen to your customer and always try to put their needs first. But I didn't have any methodology to that.
And I guess thank you for sharing that story, by the way. I love that story. One of the thoughts that kind of jumped across my mind as you were sharing that story was I can only imagine that at your company, there were other people in your role selling.
Oh, sure.
And had I been a leader or someone had been an effective leader in that organization, if a company's really story-centric, that would be the kind of story that would be shared in a sales training program with new people where they'd hear the Tom Siga story about calling on that customer.
I can tell you I've never shared it in any of those,
No,
which is
no,
probably
but
a fault
see,
of mine
but
for ever bringing it up to anybody.
you see, that's what I think really good companies are doing now is they're sharing those customer hero stories, right? Because it wasn't Tom the hero of that story, right? You made your customer the hero by getting that machine up, right? And it's the idea of codifying and making these stories available for young salespeople to be able to share themselves with their prospects and be able to almost look at them and practice them, tell them orally on demand.
So you're talking about storytelling here. You go through a really good sales career. I'm getting back to John here.
Yep.
And then you decide 23 years in to make a shift to academia. Because we're going to get to this whole thing about the sales program here.
Right.
So why the shift? And then fast forward us to you're in the business and economics school at UMD, and you come up with this idea some way, shape, or form to get a business major in the School of Business. I mean, a sales major in the School of Business, excuse me, which I got to tell you, companies have to be just going bonkers over it. So please indulge.
Well, first, let's just talk a little bit about that transition, leaving corporate America, going into academia. A lot of that just had to do, at that time, this is mid-90s, my wife and I are starting to have a family. Like Ryan, I'm a road warrior, right? Dad comes home at night. My oldest son doesn't even know who I am, right? Maybe I'm the mailman or the TV repair guy. And it really hit me. And I was thinking, this life's been good to me, but I'm going to miss human connection with my own kids if I stay at this. And my wife said, well, she was formerly associated with Outward Bound School up in Ely. She says, well, they're offering a career renewal course for troubled mid-age career crisis people like you. Go on it. So it was a 1 week wilderness trek with other midlife career crisis people where we had our kumbaya meetings around the campfire. And one of the women sitting across the campfire was the head of continuing education at Duke University. She says, why don't you become a college professor? And I had never thought of that. And so I checked into it. I had an MBA, so I was qualified to teach. I was never going to get tenure, right? Because I didn't have a PhD. But I ended up getting the call to adjunct at UMD back in 1996, and that led to full-time teaching in academia. So I get into UMD, right? This is how I made the shift. This was a big pivot for me in my life because it was all about lifestyle, right, and quality, and being able to go to my kids' hockey games and being home,
Right.
right? And I just fell in love with teaching, and I liked being in front of young adults. Found that just really, a positive experience. And I look back at it, Tom. I think part of my fun was I shared a lot of stories, right, from my business career that I think
Sure.
the students found value in, and
Successes,
yeah,
failures.
failures. And I was about almost 8 years into the gig when I started looking at placement data from UMD. And I'd get these reports, and this wasn't just graduation data from the business school. This was the College of Science and Engineering, School of Fine Arts, and they'd do a survey, right? And the graduates, the alumni would complete it, typically within a year that they graduated, and it would say their name and then their title and company, right?
Sure.
And guess what I figured out? Just anecdotally, right? This wasn't empirical data by any means, but I looked at the data and I said, you know what? 50% of kids coming out of UMD, 50%, regardless of major, are working in a customer-facing role. Out of college,
Sales.
they're in sales. We're all
That
in
dirty
sales.
word. That dirty
Yeah.
word, right?
And then I started doing some homework on it, and we had one sales course at the time, but I found out that there were some pioneering schools. There's about 4,000 universities across the country, and I found out there was about 150 that had sales programs. So that's market penetration under 5%, right? 150 out of 4,000,
Yeah.
right? And it was why not UMD? I mean, if we can have a championship men's and women hockey program at UMD, why can't we have the best sales program?
And football also.
And football also. Yes, thank you.
But why can't we do that for why the kids are coming
Right.
here?
Right.
A champion
Exactly.
academia program.
And long story short, it was really 3M who helped seed and provide the credibility and launch to get our program off the ground because they liked our vision.
So how long did it take start to finish when you came up with this,
It
started
was
presenting?
a 10-year sales cycle, Tom.
There you go.
Things don't move fast in academia. You know that.
I've been told that. I've been told. So you launch the first
Yep.
sales major,
Yep.
and we were involved there,
Yes, you were.
and we gave some presentations,
Yeah,
and I
you
just
came for the part of the launch party.
yeah, it was a blast because it's right up my alley. It's something that I love and I'm passionate about. And so tell us a little bit about the history of some of the number of kids in placement
Sure.
that are getting out there, because I know you're exceeding before you retired,
Right.
you lucky guy.
Yeah.
Exceeding your goals.
Well, we based our program really on three things. We wanted to provide kids good, solid business acumen. We wanted to teach them professional selling skills. So it was really a do to learn philosophy versus learn to do, right? And then the other part was a growth mindset, right? So growth mindset, business acumen, professional selling skills. And then we made it, in terms of how we structured the major, we made it easy for a marketing major to get the sales major in addition to the marketing major by taking only 3 extra classes. So for 9 extra credits, you could get a double major in sales and marketing. And so that was, I think, one key, right? Because we had a lot of marketing students, which at the time was our largest major in the business school.
Absolutely.
And they said, well, I'll pick up the sales major. Interesting thing, I always told them, by the way, when they wrote their resume, you don't say you had a double major in marketing and sales. You had a double major in sales and marketing. Sales comes first.
Okay.
But anyways, I think that was a part of our growth. A lot of it was storytelling. I went into the archives just like you've gone. Ryan went into the archive of Duluth Pack. I went into the archive and started telling success stories of students in sales from UMD. This is way before our sales program.
Mm-hmm.
And students just resonated with those stories. So it was storytelling that I think helped drive the demand in the enrollment as well.
So part of that whole storytelling deal,
Yeah.
and you and I really hit it off with this years ago, right away when we first met each other.
Yeah.
Is
I remember sitting in your office. I think I only had 15 minutes, but then it turned into an hour. So we were telling stories, yeah.
Yeah, well, you sure it was only an hour and a half? But there's some neuroscience behind this storytelling when you're in sales versus just ramming a product down somebody's throat. And one of the things that you're doing to really get the power behind a story, the neuroscience behind a story, how people are hardwired, as you wrote to me, hardwired to listen to a story, is you're going to write a book.
Yes.
Let's talk about this, John.
Now I feel like I'm committing to writing the book.
Oh, you so are. Because that's
when you put it out there, right, and you declare it, you better do it now.
That's when we're having you on next. The launch of your book is when you're on next. We'll talk all about your book. But tell us why you're thinking about this and why you're so passionate about writing this book to get some of the details behind the things we didn't talk about here today. It's really the neuroscience and how people retain things from storytelling versus just features and benefits from a sales standpoint.
Well, my book, I have kind of a working title right now. It's Influence with Story, right? So I wanted to make it easy, right? Influence with Story. And I actually went out and secured the domain, influencewithstory.com, right? Because every book launch now, they tell me you got to have a landing page.
That's the marketing part of it.
Yeah, that's the marketing part. And then the working subtitle is The Startling Power of Story for Moving People. And I'm going to write it not just for the business storyteller, but I want it to be a book. I believe we're all in the influence game. I mean, if I'm a parent and I have a teenager and I don't want them to text and drive, I'm in the influence game, right? I don't want them to text and drive, and we're all in the influence game. So I want to reach out and I'm going to be writing it for people that are in leadership, for people that are in marketing, for people that are in sales, for people that are in talent acquisition. But I share this framework for how to find, build, and share stories. But more importantly, as we talked earlier, is the storytelling, the story listening.
Oh, you know what? I can't wait because I've been in sales forever. I'm an old guy, and you kind of act like you know everything. And then I can tell everyone out there that in all my conversations over the years with John, I learned things all the time. And it's not just because he was in academia. He just gets it. And none of it was you throwing theories at me. It was in us talking and telling stories back and forth.
Yeah.
It wasn't just ramming. And I think that's where because a lot of students that you had work here. We have students that you taught that are managers at this company. You've been a big advocate, and we've come up to the university and spent some time meeting these folks and your students and mentoring some. But you taught in a very different way, and that was, I'll call it storytelling. I know we're saying that a lot, but it wasn't just theory. You got them to connect and listen and absorb through telling stories, and you had that 23 years prior to. So I want everyone to hang in there, John.
Okay.
Because there's going to be a book coming out. Give us that name you picked already once more.
Influence with Story.
Okay. And when that book comes out, we're going to have John on again, and we'll talk about the book. We'll kind of walk through the book with people, and so people can use it in their careers, whether you are in sales, whether you're a parent, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in production, it doesn't matter what department.
Job seekers is I want to help a lot of my former students there too.
To find a job.
Yeah.
And they have, each person has their own story.
Finding their voice, finding their story.
So, folks, today, we learned a lot. And I hope people listen to this, and I hope they listened close to the story you're telling of your career coming forward and then your career being built upon storytelling, but not just telling stories about you. And that's what I think people, a lot of people would think coming into this is, why do I want to listen about storytelling? No, it's actually a lot about listening.
Yes.
That's part of the story
Yep.
and learning from, in the sales capacity, which we talked a lot about today, is our customer, our coveted, dear customers that pay every bill
Yep.
that's at our companies. And they pay all the wages. I don't pay the wages here. Our customers pay the wages. So we need to find a way to take care of them better. And one of the ways is storytelling. And it's not just telling a story, it's making of the story. So everyone, thank you, John Kratz. We appreciate it. Have all the most fun in the world in retirement. But now you got work to do because you have to go write a book, because we're going to hold you to that. And folks, until next time, unplug from the indoors and recharge in the outdoors.